Nature or nurture? Are individuals born with a criminal gene?
It is nature and nurture that has produced every human being on this planet. Would you agree? Also, we'll dive into the genes that are indicated in psychopathy. We'll also touch on the mineral and vitamin deficiencies that may be causing the ADHD epidemic, that may be causing the depression, the anxiety, the panic attack, and all these subtle neuroses that individuals are dealing with today. Allow us to dive into this video and get into the biology of the psychopath and also get into the genetics and the mineral and vitamin deficiencies that may be leading to these other things. If you have a child that you're putting on medications for ADHD, how about making sure that you check first for the mineral and vitamin levels within his human organism and make sure they are baseline or above before you make that drastic decision that may be irreversible. Allow us to dive in.
All right, welcome back to the Psychopathy series. And this video is on nature versus nurture. And I'll spoil the video now. I'm not going to give you a conclusive answer. But what I will do is go into the biological correlates of psychopathy and then also go into some of the developmental aspects of psychopathy. So to start, I think nature versus nurture does a bad job of capturing the language of how genes and the environment interact. I think there's something satisfying about asking questions like, are psychopaths made or are they born? But unfortunately, like most things in psychology, these things are so complex and they never have straightforward answers. So nature and nurture aren't these two mutually exclusive entities. They're deeply embedded in one another and interact in very complex ways. So I prefer the phrase nature via nurture because I think that language does a better job of capturing.
And that's a mature aspect and a mature approach to what you and I need to come to understand, that it is not this simple binary outfit of nature versus nurture. They are deeply embedded. The environment creates a type of impact on the individual at the genetic level that impacts it in many different ways. So it cannot be exclusively nature, it cannot be exclusively nurture. It is the embed, they are both embedded in the development of the human species, of the human organism, of that particular individual. And it goes a little deeper when it comes to dealing with the specific parents of the offspring. If that parent's eggs and or sperm or both are corrupted and or damaged, then you're going to have an impact on the potential outcome of the offspring's behavior, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, as far as their state of being is concerned. But we'll allow him to dive deeper into it and dig into the biology of the psychopath. We're going to deal with psychopathy first, and then we'll deal with the neurotic behaviors that are more subtle and more not as extreme. And then we'll tie in the mineral and vitamin aspects and allow you to get some information in order that you move forward in a way that allows you to better not only regulate yourself, but regulate, if you have children, if you have grandchildren, regulate or put together a system to make sure that you're checking for these things before you put them on these drugs that can be very damaging. All right, allow us to continue. We'll bring him back onto the stage. I'll exit the stage and we'll let him dive in.
The interaction of the two. So the heritability of psychopathy is about 50%, but that doesn't mean it's half genetics and half environment. And so I made another video you can watch to clarify why heritability doesn't mean genetics per se. But for context, something like schizophrenia and bipolar has a heritability of about 80%. So heritability is not fate. It's not something that's immutable. And just because a trait is heritable and exists in your parents, it doesn't mean that you're destined to have that trait. So if you consider something like obesity, which has a heritability of 70 to 80%, you can get a good grasp on the fact that it's not something you're born with, but it's also not something entirely dependent on the environment. I think the design team caught wind that corporate was making some cutbacks here at Psychopharm. They really stepped up their game here. Normally I find the yin yang just a little, I don't know, tacky. But here I think it's pretty classy in this context. So let's get started on the nature side of things. So while the idea that there's a criminal gene is complete nonsense, there is growing evidence that psychopathic behavior does have some grounding in genetics and biology.
So we'll get right into that, the grounding in genetics and biology for the psychopaths. But what you'll find with those who are egregious race hustlers, such as Nick Fuentes, who always wants to blame black people for everything that is going on within this society, who wants to say that white males are disenfranchised, disinfected, or whatever because of black people. He's doing the same race hustling that many individuals love to condemn black people for doing when it comes to blaming others for his condition. He's made a living off only race hustling. He's produced nothing when it comes to building a legitimate business that is not based on his race hustling and his racist approach. He's a low capacity, low propensity individual that gets a lot of play on a lot of these airways because there's a subtle racism that exists amongst many individuals. And this is on both the right, this is on both black and white. But we're dealing mostly in this case with Nick Fuentes, whose whole persona, whose whole business model is based on race and based on trying to condemn black people, trying to say black people are inferior, trying to say black people are born criminal. He is as ridiculous as any human being on the planet. He wouldn't dare say that those who founded this country, who raped, pillaged, destroyed, killed, robbed, stole, bought human beings were criminals. And that is the large scale of criminalities. So this is what you deal with when you deal with these race hustlers who try to make it nature versus nurture. Now let's dive back in. I got off a little bit on that, but that was something that I needed to get off my chest. So allow us to get back into the video. We'll bring them back up onto the stage and allow myself to exit the stage, bring them back up, and get them back talking to you. Let's go.
So anyone who's had multiple kids knows that infants just differ in temperament. Sometimes they're chill, sometimes they're difficult, and it can be the exact same household. So temperamentally, psychopaths are known to differ in their constitutional aggressivity. So some of those areas include their activity level, their aggressiveness, their reactivity, their consolability, and other factors that tilt them towards being a little bit more aggressive. So next I want to go into the biochemical and genetic predispositions that increase your susceptibility to psychopathy. So one thing I really want to emphasize is that if you have one of these genes, it doesn't make you a psychopath. If you have every single gene that is correlated to psychopathy, it doesn't mean you're going to be a psychopath. It just means that you have an increased susceptibility compared to someone who didn't have that gene. So the first is variation in monoamine oxidase A, and that enzyme is responsible for breaking down neurotransmitters. It acts non-specifically on norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. So if someone had a low expression variant, you'd expect them to have higher levels of those monoamine transmitters. So it's been found that people who have that variation are more likely to develop violent and antisocial patterns of behavior. Next is a variant in BDNF that causes it to be less active. So BDNF is a protein that is made by neurons and glial cells, and it promotes the growth and activity of brain cells. It's almost like the miracle growth of the brain. So individuals who have this genetic variant have less cortical thickness, and it's believed they do a poorer job of just cognitive processing in general.
So allow me to jump in real quick on this BDNF. What has been shown to be very extremely beneficial for the growth of BDNF is fasting. Now, I don't know if that's the case for those who have that particular variant, but for those individuals who do not have it, fasting can definitely increase the production of BDNF within the body, and this is very beneficial. So you want to look into fasting if you think that you have that variant or have been diagnosed with a variant of the BDNF that doesn't allow the body to produce it at the rate that it needs to be produced. Now allow us to dive back in with him and allow him to continue to educate us.
Especially in the prefrontal cortex that's responsible for making moral judgments. The next one is that some abnormalities in receptor systems is linked to psychopathy. So for example, it's known that variations in the serotonin transporter yields different traits and susceptibilities. So one example is 5-HTTP-LPR, which is a long allele for the serotonin transporter. It's known to be protective against internalizing disorders, but it also may cause an increased susceptibility to psychopathy. And also there's some evidence that dysregulation of the endogenous opioid system is linked to an increased susceptibility. And lastly, it's known that high levels of testosterone and low levels of cortisol are linked to psychopathy. And this makes sense because testosterone is involved in approach-related behavior and reward sensitivity and fear reduction. So next I want to go into some of the neural changes that are known to occur in psychopathy. So the first is that psychopaths have a remarkably low reactivity of their autonomic nervous system. So the ANS is what's involved in the fight or flight response. So this likely explains their sensation seeking and failure to learn from experience and poor conditioning to painful stimuli, because the ANS gets triggered during events that invoke fear and anxiety. So someone who didn't have the appropriate response at that time wouldn't avoid things that normal people would avoid. So it also leads to a lower threshold of impulsive behavior. But here's a quote from Jeffrey Dahmer discussing a behavior that no normal person would ever do.
Afterwards, were you repulsed? Were you upset?
No, at the time, it was almost addictive. It was almost a surge of energy.
So humans like a little bit of their autonomic nervous system engaged. That's why we're drawn to things like roller coasters or haunted houses, because it gives us a thrill. I think for Jeffrey Dahmer to feel something similar, he had to do really bad stuff. So the next thing is that psychopaths have abnormalities in the strength of their connections of their neural circuits. So again, this is part nurture, but it's known that early neglect can affect the development of the orbitofrontal cortex, which is kind of like the moral.
So that's one of the key things that we must kind of understand as well. Even though there is a nature component to what he's talking about with these weak connections, he's also talking about the neglect component in that when it comes to a child that is developing early on, this can cause weak connections within a very important part of the brain. So this and these things are key. Allow him to continue.
Center of the brain. So it's involved in sensory integration in order to carry out its function in decision making and expectation. In particular, it compares the expected reward and punishment with the actual reward and punishment. So it's really important in adaptive learning. And it does this with its connection with the limbic system. So it's involved in emotion and memory. So in particular, like its amygdala and hippocampus. So by having a poor connectivity, psychopaths have difficulty in judging whether they should or shouldn't do something and evaluating the emotional context of situations. Imagine making decisions without the part of the brain that says, is this a good idea? Does this fit in with my morality? So psychopaths also have a hypoactive amygdala, and the amygdala is in the temporal lobe, and it's engaged in monitoring the environment for threats and then generating an anxiety response when fear is present. So if you find yourself not monitoring for threats and not really experiencing fear, you're going to find yourself in some pretty stupid situations. It's also known psychopaths have anomalies in linguistic processes, and this is probably related to the weak connectivity in the brain that's responsible for synthesizing the emotional context of things and the cognitive context of things. And there's also something called Hare's lateralization theory, and he believed that psychopaths differ in how they process the affective aspects of language, and he believed they had limited left hemispheric resources for processing linguistic stimuli. And he used this to explain why psychopaths have smaller physiological responses to emotional connotations of descriptive statements or pictures compared to non-psychopaths. And again, I'm never terribly impressed with neural or biochemical interpretations of diagnoses like this. There's just too much variability person to person that not much can be said about any particular one gene or one neural deficit or one biochemical deficiency. So the thing I just want you to take away is that there are biochemical aspects to these diseases, but it's important not to use these things to develop a fatalistic attitude toward any one disease. There's just too much interaction between genetics and environment for any one genetic predisposition to be a sentence to becoming a psychopath. I just find that ascribing personality disorders to genetics or biochemistry can be abused and be used to decrease empathy, whereas I find focusing on the developmental and the nurture aspect of things allows us to focus on things that can change and can be addressed by psychological and social interventions.
This was a great video in my estimation. What we'll do right here, I'm going to pull up the nutrient and mineral sheets and allow you to see what it is that you want to make sure that you are adequate in, and especially those of you who are attempting or will be looking to have offsprings. You not only need to make sure that you are in a healthy state so that your egg and that your egg, if you're a woman, your sperm, that you're a man, is healthy enough to produce an offspring that is not compromised from the beginning. So again, it's nature and it's nurture that plays the biggest role. We'll dive into these. We'll dive into these We'll dive into these nutrient and mineral deficiencies that individuals want to make sure that they are a part of. I'm making sure that I got the right thing right here. I don't think I have the right one. Yeah, maybe this one right here. So again, we're dealing with the effects on, hopefully you can see this. Let me make sure. Yeah, you can see it. Good. So we went to Grunk to get some information. Again, AI is a tool. Use the tool because it can definitely be beneficial for you and you should use it. So we're going to Grunk right here. We're dealing with the effect of mineral and vitamin deficiencies on brain and mental health outcomes, brain functioning. We're dealing with vitamin B12 deficiency, impairs myelin formation, slowing nerve signaling, and cognitive function linked to memory and memory deficits. So this is linked to memory deficits. Vitamin B12 is not only great for the brain, but it also is essential for the heart as well. Iron deficiencies reduces oxygen transport to the brain, impairing cognitive development, attention, and learning. So again, we must understand that these vitamin and mineral deficiencies have a profound effect on our mental and emotional health. As you can see behind me, magnesium deficiency disrupts neurotransmitter regulation, affecting sympathetic plasticity and cognitive performance. So again, magnesium, and they say that upwards of 60 to 70% of those of us who are living in America at least are magnesium deficient. So we must make sure that we get that checked. It has a profound effect on the nervous system, and it is linked to episodes of epilepsy. My girl has epilepsy, so I know this. Zinc deficiency impairs neurogenesis, synaptic function, leading to cognitive decline and memory loss. And this is why, again, we must make sure that we dive into those situations where we have enough minerals in our body in order to impact our body in its best, or give our body its best chance to operate and function at the level that it is equipped and meant to function at. Then vitamin D deficiencies, you know that's the epidemic. Reducing neuroprotection linked to cognitive impairment and neurodegenerative diseases. And again, these stuffs are happening, so it's the mental health outcomes. We'll say linked to elevated homocysteine levels, increasing risk of depression and anxiety. I have higher homocysteine levels, but I don't have depression and or anxiety. I have been able to correct much of that. That was one of the reasons. It's also linked to higher blood pressure. So when you have high homocysteine levels, you want to make sure that you get checked for that. That's not something that your doctors would check for without you asking. You need to ask them, all right? Then it's vitamin D deficiencies associated with mood disorders, including depression, seasonal affective disorder. Then magnesium deficiency contributes to anxiety, stress, sleep disturbances due to its role in calming neural activity. Omega-3 fatty acids deficiency linked to higher risk of depression, anxiety, mood instability. Zinc association with mood disorders, aggression, and reduced stress resilience. So these are some things that we have to make sure that we need to look at. And again, it's not just nature, it's nurture. It's a combination of both. If you like the video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Hopefully you have a beautiful day. Sending you peace and always love. Peace.